38, inshallah. So just finish up the last part of the Aqidah part of this book. So inshallah, I'll try to finish this off today, inshallah. It's 2 pages. So the last chapter that the author has presented is the divine names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He has written quite a bit of detail here, but we'll keep it brief for us, inshallah. So he mentioned the divine names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are only those that have been revealed. Hence, one cannot ascribe a name to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala unless it has come to us through revelation and the sacred law, the Sharia. So here the author is reminding us that the names that we have for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the attributes of Allah, the 99 names, all these have been mentioned somewhere, either in the Quran or the Hadith. So there'll be some kind of proof for these. So we can't make our own names up just that we think something means it's got a good meaning and then we just ascribe to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We can't make our own names up. So he mentions here that the names that you should attribute to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are the names which He has already used for Himself without making your own variations. Then it's permissible to refer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the term thing. You only say a shay. In Arabic, shay means a thing. And he says, or al-mawjood. Mawjood means something which is present or something that exists. So here he says you can't use these 2 words for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He does exist. So you can say Allahu mawjoodun, for example. Allah is mawjood, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is present. But it says these can be said in English or any other language as well. It's not only that you have to say shay or mawjood. You can say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He exists. When we say He exists, we're saying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mawjood. He is present. So we can say that in every language we want, as long as the meaning is to that effect. He says similarly, one may use nafs to refer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he mentions at the bottom, what is meant by nafs when referring to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is His dhat, the being of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you can refer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the dhat or the being. And then as something which is important that he touches upon, we should know about. He says, as for the terms nur, like he mentioned in the Quran Kareem, Allahu nuru samawati wal ard, or he mentioned the word wajh, which translates, there are lots of translations in English, but they are not the translation when we refer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So nur in English, what would we say? It's a light. Wajh, if you check in the dictionary, it'll say face. Yad in the dictionary, if you check, it'll say a hand. These words are used in the Quran Kareem for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? But they are not the physical hand, face, the nur of creation that we see around us. This is where people have slipped up, this is where the difference of Sunnis and Wahhabis and all this comes in. Is where we as Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, we believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has used the word wajh, i.e. face, or yad, hand in the Quran Kareem, but we say we cannot translate these words. So even if you look at the Urdu translation, it'll say the wajh of Allah. In the English, if you see, it says the wajh of Allah. The word wajh will still be there. The word yad, hand will also still be there. They won't translate it into the hand of Allah or the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because that becomes giving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala a physical body, which is not the stance of the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Hence, there's 2 positions of this. How to understand this? The first position of the earlier generations, like the Sahaba Karam and so on, for them the understanding was these words are written in the Quran, like Allah is doing istiwa ala al-arsh. Allah is sitting on the throne. In English, they say sitting on the throne. But when we say sitting in English, it gives the idea that Allah is got like a body, there's a chair, and He's physically sitting. So it gives you that kind of idea. So when we say Allah is doing istiwa on the arsh, What does istiwa mean? I don't know. Why do you believe it? Because it says in the Quran. Same with the word wajh, the face of Allah. We translate it as face, but it doesn't mean the face. We say the wajh of Allah. What does that mean? Allah knows best. This is the first and original opinion of the first generation of Muslims. Then afterwards, what happened was people started getting confused. What do you mean that we believe in these words, but we don't know what they mean? We believe in the wajh. Our understanding is face, but you're saying it doesn't mean face, it means something else. So then afterwards, the later scholars, the people start going astray and getting the wrong understanding. Then they give explanations. Like the hand of Allah means the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know, some hadiths mention Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He comes down to the lower heavens. Some literally take that. And that's the wrong understanding. Why? When you say Allah comes down to the lower heavens, what does that mean? You're trying to say He's got a physical body, He must come down something. So, it doesn't mean that Allah physically comes down. It means the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is descending more on those nights or those times for those people. Right? So, whenever you see anything, these are called mutashabihat in the Quran Kareem, that those things which are unclear. Like there are things in the Quran Kareem that we don't know the meaning of, like Alif, Lam, Mim, Yasin, Taha, Qaf. All these surahs start with one of these few letters. We don't know what these letters mean, but they do have a meaning. Right? And the Prophet ﷺ, we believe the Prophet ﷺ understood these words. That's why, because if Allah is saying something and no one understands, not even the Prophet ﷺ, that means Allah's speech will be pointless. Right? Because everyone, when you speak to someone, the idea is that the next person knows what you're saying. But if no one understands it, then you're just, what would you say? Like if I'm speaking French and no one knows French, they're not going to say the crowd's dumb, they're going to say this guy's lost it. Right? He doesn't know, the crowd speaks English and this guy's speaking French. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is addressing us in the Quran Kareem, there has to be someone that understands all the words. And we believe that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he understands the meaning of those words, like Yasin, Alif, Lam, Mim. But we as the Ummah, we don't understand. Similarly with these words, the wajhullah, the face of Allah, the hand of Allah, it does have a meaning, but what does it mean? We don't know. So we still say the wajh of Allah. We won't say the face of Allah. We'll say the yad of Allah. We won't say the hand of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And those who say that and give Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala a physical body, they're considered people who have gone astray or misguided by giving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala a similarity to creation. Even if you say Allah the nur, a light we translate, what comes in our mind? A light bulb, the sun, some form of creation comes in our mind. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's free from that. So anything, the bottom line is that if someone describes to you Allah in a way that it matches anything that exists, not human beings, anything, plants, creatures, shapes, dimensions, smells, anything that matches the creation, then you say that's not Allah. Simple. That can't be Allah because these are Allah's creation and Allah is far greater than His creation, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then he mentions some words may be used to refer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when they come as a construction, i.e. two words that come together. And then, like, Ya Rafi' al-Darajat, the one who raises ranks. And they've used different ones here. Ya Dafi' al-Bariyat. These kind of names or attributes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they're mentioned in the Quran or the Hadith in compound as well. They come as two words joined together to give the meaning. So when we use those words, and for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we also use them the way they are found. We found them in the Quran. We can't do our own combinations and to describe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, this is because with regard to the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Most High, we do not exceed the limits set by the sacred law, whose texts do not mention these names other than in compound constructions. So these things only have been mentioned, the way they've been mentioned, use them like that. Don't start making your own variations. And then he says, you can't use certain things for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala like mahjub. Mahjub means something which has been hidden or veiled or covered. You can't use that for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's some things that are a bit extra details, so I'm just missing them out. So like they mentioned here that some words that might seem that make sense to you, but you're not allowed to use them. Like say, Allah the intelligent, right? So even though it might seem to you that it's something positive, but because it hasn't been used in the text, Quran and Hadith, then you don't use those for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then say, likewise, one may not use the terms the one who enters or the absent to refer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is permissible, however, to say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is hidden from creation. And so that's like an explanation rather than just saying that the hidden or the one who enters like that. And then he just moves on to the last few things other than the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just to close off this chapter, it says, the events that unfold at the end of time as reported to us by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam are realities. These include, now they mentioned some of the other things that we should also believe as well, and they want to conclude the chapter of Aqidah here. He said these include the emergence of the Dajjal, Antichrist, the beast, the Dabatul Ard, Yajuj and Majuj, the descent of Isa alayhi salam coming back, and the rising of the sun from the west. So these things are mentioned as the signs of Yawm al-Qiyamah. These things will happen towards the end of times. So he said believing in this is proven through our religious texts as well. So to understand that these are mentioned and to believe in them is a part of Iman as well, to understand that these things will happen. He said we do not give credit to any soothsayer or anyone who, a person, people make these things up, and in a modern time people say these like false beliefs, right? When they do one truth and then all the bimariya go, but when the actual bimari like COVID came, there's no truth, so nothing was happening, right? So it's important that we keep this in mind. This happens anyway, like it doesn't mean a certain person, and these kind of things, they're not something new in the Pakistani. A lot of people, you have this understanding that it's a Pakistani or the Indian thing that these things happen. These things happen in the Arab world as well. Black magic or so-called sheikhs or peers who do dumb on you and they say it works, and it don't really work. They just scamming you. They have a few people set up and try to take money and get followers from people. But the reality is that these two things do exist at the same time. They are al-ayn wa haqqun, for example, the evil eye is a fact. Nazar, what we say, nazar in Amazon, right? Nazar can happen. These things are realities. People can do black magic on you. This is a reality. We believe in these things. At the same time, we also believe that there are people who are qualified to, remove these effects from you as well. So I'm not saying that believing in peace and all this is incorrect, because it's like a spiritual journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You have to have this connection to these people. Why? Because the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he left the Sahaba Ikram, who then passed the message on to the Mashayikh and the ulama of their students, who passed it on to their students, who passed it on to their students. So the inheritance of the prophets is ilm, knowledge. So there are people today who have this ilm. Some people have a certain part of that ilm, might be in terms of the spiritual aspect. Some people might have it in terms of the knowledge aspect. Some people might have both aspects. So it's not that these things don't exist. We have to also believe in these things as well.
What's the beast about?
Inshallah, we'll cover that in more detail later. But these are just the signs of the Yawm al-Qiyamah. Like a lot of youngsters, they like to research these and watch some YouTube videos on Dabatul Ard and stuff. But inshallah, we'll cover these in more detail later on, inshallah.
What makes it appear that How would you dictate for another peer? Like, what makes it? She just says, yo, peer, and people follow it. What?
No, this is in this Abir and a Sheikh. In our culture, we call it Abir.
Okay.
But now, like, you have these Sheikhs online. Sheikh and Abir is the same thing, basically. But they just use it in modern terms. If you say you're Abir, these guys are braveries and they lost roses and they try to insult us, basically. Right? It's like saying, and you know, they use modern words as well, and they try to misguide the young generation. Like, for example, they say Taweez is not allowed, right? And they say Ruqya is allowed. That's like me saying Pani is not allowed, but water is allowed. Just because you change the language, the young generation doesn't understand. So they change the language, I use the Arabic term for it, and people think, oh, that thing's not allowed. Peers are not allowed, man. Peers are fake and dodgy, but you should go to sheikhs. That's like saying, like I was mentioned, a Pani is not allowed, but you like to have water. Yeah? So a sheikh and a peer is, there's two types of connection to the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. One is knowledge, one is ruhaniyat. There's no knowledge without spirituality as well, right? So what happens is, the Sahaba Ikram, they give bay'ah to the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, that we call bay'at, and they pledge allegiance to the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. After the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam passed on, then the Sahaba Ikram give bay'at to Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq radiyallahu anhu. They pledge allegiance to him, and then so on and so went. As every generation went, the Shaykh or the ulama, the senior people, they gave permission. Even now it happens, it's called ijazat, right? Ijazah is the Arabic word as well, right? They give ijazah to their students who they consider worthy to pass on a certain, like for example, imagine you guys are studying hadith with me, or we're studying hadith with a Shaykh. The Shaykh will sometimes give permission that I give you ijazat to teach the hadith. That's one type of ijazah. One, the Shaykh might be saying that no, you don't have ijazah to teach it, but you have the ijazah to read the hadith to people. So the different calibers, different scholarship, different levels of spirituality. So a real Shaykh or alim is a person who follows the Quran, who follows the Sunnah of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And he goes on this spiritual journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Tasawwuf, he has this connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a spiritual connection as well. And then when he teaches his students, then the one who he considers to have be on a spiritual level, he gives him that permission. That you're qualified to take peers, to say people as followers, to spiritually guide them. Some people will be, no, you only, like for example, a Shaykh has 10 students. He might give, khilafah to one, they call it khilafah, right? Khilafah. So like they give him ijazah to say, you're qualified to become a peer. I.e., you're qualified to get your own followers, murids. But what do? You teach them Quran and Sunnah. So the Shaykh will give you something to read. He's not going to say to you, praise me, kiss my hands, kiss my feet. No, the true Shaykh is going to say to you, do istighfar in the morning 10 times, read Yusuf at this time, make sure your namaz is done properly. He's giving knowledge and spirituality as well. That's what a real Shaykh is. But if a Shaykh that you see as, or someone is calling him a peer, and he's clashing the Sunnah, then he's not a peer. Right? So even our great one, Allah Ta'ala, there are conditions of a Shaykh is that he has to know the deen. If he's ignorant of the deen, then he's not qualified to be a Shaykh. If he's contradicting the Sunnah of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, then he's not qualified as a Shaykh. These days people consider a Shaykh or a peer someone who can do miracles, for example. Or that guy can fly, he's my peer, he does something special like that. The ulama mentioned that these things are nothing. The real sign of your spirituality is that you don't abandon the Sunnah of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Every Sunnah that you see that Shaykh applies, he has to, and he's applying the Sunnah of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. If he's not abandoning it, then you know he's a true Shaykh. A person who is not applying the Sunnah and then is flying this, that, then he's not really a true. People take that as a sign of a true wali and a true friend of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Hence you have those stories of, I think I shared this with you last time when we went through that part of the book, that there's so-and-so sheikh came and there's a Christian church there and they used to call it Girja in the language, right? And he looked at it and said Girja and he fell down. Because Patwari, Girja means fall down, yeah? Yeah, so some of these things, just stories made up. Just because it has the same word, so you want to give wow, you're going to say wow, the priest said Girja, the thing, Girja fell down basically. Yeah? But these things are just made up stories. There's a lot of these stories, fake ones, attributed to, Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani, rahimahullah ta'ala, big sheikhs of the past, fake stories are attributed towards them, just to get like this amusement and people will say wow and stuff like that. But if you look into it, the idea of a sheikh and a pir is to spiritually take you on a journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and is more of a spiritual ruhani connection to the sharia. So they're like you hold on to their hand and they've held on to a hand who's held to their teacher, their sheikh, who held the hand of a sahabi, who held the hand of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So you do tawbah at the hand of the sheikh. That's why when you give bay'ah to a sheikh, you actually do tawbah at the hand of the sheikh. And he did tawbah at the hand of his sheikh, I won't do so, and I'll pray my salah and so on. Who did tawbah at the hand of his sheikh, who did tawbah at the hand all the way to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and who was inspired by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through revelation. So it's a connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a way. Having a pir and a sheikh is not something that is made up to like. Unfortunately, when we have these new groups of, Wahhabi, they say, how could you say this person? And this is the thing they say, how do you know this man is the awali, and how could you think this sheikh, he probably doesn't read in namaz at home, he probably doesn't do this. They make these so-called comments, and how do you know the namaz that you read is accepted? Right? But there are narrations that I mentioned as there were certain individuals who presented, they were stuck in a cave, for example, in one hadith, and they presented that, oh Allah, I did such and such action. If it's accepted in your court, remove the stone from the front, and then the stone removed. And then the second one, he presented, oh Allah, I did this action. But who guaranteed them that action was accepted? But they still presented it in the court of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's Allah's choice to accept it or not. We know through our apparent, that's why we're going to give the fatwa on our understanding that this person was a righteous person, he led a righteous life, he taught the Quran and Sunnah, the books he's written, this is what we're benefiting from, and then we know that the person was sound and truthful. But obviously on the day of judgment, he might not go to heaven, but you might go to heaven, right? But that's beside the point. That's the raz and secret between him and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like sometimes people make these comments, like sometimes you have to tell someone in a harsh way. Like a person said to me, I went to a gathering and he's trying to help insult ulama, scholars and imams, he's trying to insult them. And he's like, oh, you guys are lost. You believe your teachers are going to heaven, this, that. Your teacher could go to hell. How do you know? Why you go with dua at his grave? I said that your dad could be going to hell. Right? And then he got offended. But if you can say that about awliya and the sheikhs and the mashayikh, right? I said, you're offended. But then he said, how dare you say that about my dad? This and that. I said, you can say about ulama who wrote all these books about Quran and hadith and say that they're going to hell, so why are you making dua for them? Or dua at the graves? But you're okay to make dua for your father's grave. It doesn't make sense. Right? So if you're offended by your father, then you should be more offended about the ulama and the people who helped us to, kept us under kalimat tayyiba la ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. If it wasn't for the awliya, then we wouldn't be. But sometimes some people learn the hard way and then he's like, yeah, it makes sense now. And so sometimes you have to be a bit harsh on it. But these are the, sometimes the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it might not be, you might think it's hard, but it's something, a fact, like a person came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and said, do you give me ijazah to do zina? And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to the person, how would you like if someone to your mother, to your sister, then a person learns the lesson that if I don't want that to happen to my family, then how could I want that for someone else's family? So similarly, that person learned that lesson as well. And this is this then is our religion and belief. So all what he's mentioned so far, both outward and the inward, we are. And then he mentioned that whatever's been mentioned, this is the Aqidah of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us steadfast in faith and to end our lives upon Him. We ask Him to safeguard us from whims contrary to the aforementioned, while from wide opinions such as those who liken Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to His creation. We deny any of His attributes, who allege that the self creates their own actions. So they can mention this about before. The group of people, they call themselves Qadariyya. They say everything we do is our own. We do everything ourselves, nothing to do with Allah. Whatever I do, the good, bad, anything I do is my own choice. And then you have another group who say they call some Jabariyya. Everything that happens, Allah does it. If I slap you, then Allah made me do it. Yeah, so so one is extremely Qadariyya, we do everything ourselves. The other side is extremely Jabariyya, that we're forced to do everything. But the true stance of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah is some things we have Qadar, some things we have a Jabar. If I told you to stand up on one leg, you stand up. If I say lift the other one, you can't. So some things in our life become under the Qadar. We have the control. Something we don't have control of. The family we're born in, the color of our skin, the color of our eyes, all these kind of things, we don't have a control of these things. So we're forced to be like that. But then certain things we have control of is our a'mal, our actions, and then so we're responsible for those things on Yawm al-Qiyamah. And then since we believe in the noble angelic scribes, as well as the appointed guardian angels, while we consign their number over to the Lord Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just as we believe in the prophets and messengers. So just mention about, we believe in angels, but we don't know how many angels there are, in other words. How many there are, that's between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's Allah's knowledge. And so we do mention the existence of angels, but we don't know how much they are. And may Allah's blessings and peace be upon them all forever into eternity, and many blessings, the number of all that ever existed and all that exists in this life and the next life and the day of judgment. All praises of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one who guided us to this, and we would not have been guided except the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So anyone who gets hidayat, like for example, people send these videos that someone saw them Dawan, converted someone to Islam, and he does this so much work. Hidayat is only from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even a kafir can make someone a Muslim. By doing something, saying something, you're so foolish that the next guy realizes, hang on a minute, this is ridiculous. Right? There has to be a God out there. So it's, like for example, we have like 9/11 happened, and Islam was blamed for terrorism, and Muslims kill people and so on and so forth. But what happened? Non-Muslims, they're accusing Muslims of terrorism, and more non-Muslims becoming Muslims at the hands of who? Bush and Blair and these guys. They're non-Muslims accusing us of what? They're terrorists, and people are saying, a normal non-Muslim, who are these Muslims? Who are these so-called terrorists? Let's read. They mention the Quran, let's check what the Quran is. And they open the Quran and become Muslims. Right? Because they get guided. So it's nothing of our own kamal or our own doing that we're guided. It's nothing of our own, that we're better than other people. I study Islam, so-and-so doesn't study Islam. I read my namaz, so-and-so doesn't read namaz. Everything that we have, everything we're given is the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and He guides whom He wills and He misguides whom He wills. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for pardon and well-being in our religious and worldly affairs for us and our parents, children, teachers, brethren in Islam, and Allah knows best. So that was the conclusion of this chapter. regarding the Aqidah section, inshallah. What we do for Aqidah, I'll pick certain topics every week and we'll discuss them, mention one topic a week, and I'll go through like the knowledge of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the ilm al-ghayb, the nur of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and things about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So certain things that or we find challenging in our modern time, or people accuse Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'at of, or people who have misguided from certain beliefs, then we tackle one of those, one belief a week, inshallah, for the Aqidah part, inshallah. Next, for the fiqh, if you turn to page 66. Page 66. So last lesson we left off, this is the last part of Kitab al-Tahara, the book of purification. So last lesson we spoke about saliva of animals and so on, and now he finishes off the chapter of istinja. So there is a lot of detail mentioned here, but inshallah, when need be, I'll mention it right now, then I'll move on, inshallah. So he says here, after urinating, a man must ensure that no drops remain in the passageways until no trace of wetness appears at the tip of the prior parts, since its appearance prevents the validity of wudu. So normally, when you go to the toilet and you urinate, after you've stopped urinating, there will always be one or two drops in the passageway. If you don't cough, there's different methods that are mentioned here, which they might touch upon. It's mentioned at the bottom anyway, and talk about them. It says ensuring that the drops of urine that remain in the passageway can be you remove them in a number of ways. By walking, by cleaning your throat, because when you do this, right, pressure goes on your stomach, so if there's any drops in the passageway, they will come out. And then it says lying on your side or gently squeezing the prior part without causing yourself harm, depending on whatever the person feels comfortable doing, or whichever is that works for you basically, right? So if you don't do istibra, this is called istibra, freeing yourself from the last drops, then what will happen, those drops will go into your clothes. So when you wear your underwear, they go into your underwear, hence it's got major impurity. And if it's more than one or two drops which will spread, then your salah will be invalid and you need to repeat the salah again. But you won't know, because once it dries up, it might not leave it off, but you know, but those clothes will be impure. And this narration is mentioned that we're checking the hadith, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam walked past two graves, and the people were being punished in their grave. And so the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he got a branch from a tree, and he like a branch, and he split it in half, put one half on top of one grave, and put the other half on top of the other grave. And the Sahaba they inquired, Ya Rasulullah, why did you put this? Why did you do this basically? And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that these people are being punished in the grave. And one of them, the reason he was being punished in his grave was because he didn't save himself from his urine drops. And this is the same hadith they used for the proof that you're allowed to put flowers on the graveyard, on top of the grave. The Prophet ﷺ said, as long as the flowers remain alive, then they're doing the tasbih of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The blessings also come on the person beneath the flower as well. So hence, if the flower has died and is dead on the grave, you can remove those flowers. If it's alive, then you're doing the tasbih of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the person in the grave, he benefits from the blessing that come down into the flower.
What about fake plants?
Fake plants, people put them for making it look nice. That's pointless. The purpose, the reason why flowers are allowed is not to adorn the grave, not to make the grave look nice. The purpose is what this hadith mentioned about, where this story of this person is punished for his urine drops. The Prophet ﷺ got the branch, you would say, and put it inside the grave and said, as long as the branch stays alive and does the dhikr of Allah, the person will benefit. So people go put these fake flowers on top of graves. They're basically pointless. It serves no purpose. The purpose is not to make the grave nice and beautiful. The purpose is that the dhikr is done of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All living things do the dhikr of Allah, and the person in the grave also benefits. So you can put even like a normal twigs, for example, and like a little branch that doesn't look so fancy but is alive. You can even put that inside on top of the grave, and for that one purpose, so the person inside the grave can benefit. But anyway, moving on, like I'm mentioning, so it's important and necessary, not just optional, but necessary to make sure the last drops of urine are removed. This for the men, they can do these 2 things. For the women, they just have to just wait a few moments and then fine. Then after you do your istinja. Okay, so this is important that your washing part is done afterwards. Because once you washed yourself and then the drops come out, then you're back to stage 1. And so it's important that you dry yourself, wash yourself afterwards, after you clean yourself and remove the last drops. Is that if the filth that exits the body does not move beyond the exit point itself, then it is sunnah to clean that area. The istinja itself is sunnah by using stones to remove all the like Madani. So there's different levels of commands. Like for example, we spoke about ghusl. After certain things, ghusl becomes farz on you. At certain times, ghusl is only sunnah. Like for example, Jummah, the sunnah is to do ghusl. Eid days, is sunnah to do have a shower. But certain times, having the shower is farz on you, right? Similarly, istinja has different levels as well. So if the filth exits your body and it doesn't touch any of the skin around the exit point, then it's sunnah to wash yourself basically. You don't need to wash yourself with water. The tissue or the stone will be enough. That's why it mentions here to do istinja. But now, this all is depending on your climate and what you eat. In the UK, the food we eat, the climate we live in, anything that generally exits the body, it will kind of spread from the exit point. This is talking about it more applies to like places, people live in the desert, they eat dried food all the time, and then obviously when they go to the toilet, then they might eat less. They could be poor, for example. So obviously the filth covers every single person, so they won't have that much filth on their body. So if it doesn't go beyond the exit point, then it's sunnah to clean yourself. And cleaning oneself is emphasized sunnah mu'akkada for both men and women after using the toilet. To do so after just passing gas is a bid'ah, since the gas itself is not impure. So, normally this is our culture as well, that when people go to do wuzu, they do istinja. This is incorrect. This is wrong. Right? This is bid'ah, this is innovation. Like I told one of the students in class that you don't do that, so he went home and so he done wudu and then he got leather basically. Why? You never done istinja, how is it wudu done? But istinja is only done when you actually use the toilet, something has come out of your passageway. Just passing gas, you do not need to do istinja. And if you do istinja just after passing gas, then it's a bid'ah, it's an innovation in Islam, it's something added. And it shouldn't be added, it's not allowed basically. Okay, so this is something to keep in mind. And so istinja should only generally be done if something leaves the body part. Another time that we can do istinja as an extra is like, for example, after waking up, because you might not be sure. Sometimes people don't do istinja when they wake up and they do wudu, read fajr, and then they go to the toilet and then they check and they realize that ghusl was farz on them. So it's good to, sometimes you don't realize that you had certain experience at night, and then afterwards you realize after you read the namaz and all that. So it's best to do istinja and at least go to the toilet, cleanse yourself before Suffa-tul-islam or when you wake up afterwards as well. And this is, one should wipe forwards and then backwards until it is clean. So even though ulama, this is how perfect our deen is, that the ulama even have wrote how to even do istinja, how do you wipe yourself. So for the men, you wipe forward, then back, then forward, then back in that way, and not with the same tissue, but on separate occasions. But for women, you only be front to back only, in one direction. Whereas for men, you wipe both ways until you're convinced that you're clean. Right? So it can't be that you just, people say sunnah is to use 3, 5, 7, you use 3 and you're clean. It might not be the case, you might not be clean. So it's not the numbers, it's about when you know that you're clean, then that's considered you purified yourself. And then he mentions here that it is ideal to wash the area afterwards until one feels convinced that the filth is removed. And in the footnote, if you look, it says, the method is to wipe, is to both wipe and to wash with water as well. So in modern times, you clean yourself with tissue and then you wash yourself. But if you have to use one thing, then you use the water. Right? So that's really the best way to do it. Another important thing that they mention here, finally it is not permissible to expose one's nakedness to others, even to perform istinja. Right? So it's important that you don't uncover yourself in front of anyone. And Islamically, your aura for men is from your bottom of your knees to your belly button. So this should not be uncovered to anyone at any time. This means in school when you get changed for PE, this commonly happens, it's a common practice unfortunately. Right? If you think that it's going to be exposed the other way, then you know what day you have PE, where you keep underneath. Right? You as a Muslim, you have to be prepared. You can't blame other people for your lack of preparation. So as a Muslim, you should be fully aware. If you know your school is in a way that you have to get changed in front of people. And unfortunately, the society we live in is like this. I used to, about 2 years ago, during COVID, I used to go to Meads Primary School. It's just past the Saints area in Demons. And I was teaching, I used to go on to be a TA for year 3 class. And one day I just walked into the class, it was PE time, and literally all the kids were changing in front of each other. And naturally, fitrat of it. There's one Muslim girl, and obviously, non-Muslim households, they openly, mom and dad are walking around, dressing appropriately. So obviously, those children, for them, it becomes a norm. Why they go swimming in public places, they go to beaches, wearing nothing. And then obviously, in school is a non-issue for them. And I've seen the Muslim girls, right? They were under the bench. Obviously, I walked in and then I walked back out. What the hell is going on here? But there was 2 Muslim girls under the table getting dressed. And this shows the natural fitrat of a human being. This is what, unfortunately, this culture takes away from our children, especially in schools and that, until it becomes a norm. Young guys pulling each other's boxes and stuff and giving each other veggies. And they think these things are standard and it's funny, but in reality, this is haram. It's a major haram to do these kind of things. But unfortunately, this becomes a norm especially in schools that the youngsters go to. So you should be more aware of what's happening. And when you go to school, you should keep your modesty and haya there as well for the youngsters. So even if you go to the toilet, the standing up urinals, it's good not to use them, especially in public places, without valid reason. Maybe, for example, you bust your leg, you can't sit on the toilet, then you can. But it depends. But if it's a public place, you do not stand up and use those. Right? It's good not to use those, and especially in front of others, you're uncovering yourself. And this also connects with, I just want to make the side issue, is obviously we have married men here as well. Like ladies, men generally want the women to remove hair from their body, but it's haram for them to expose their body to certain Muslims, women. And in front of a Muslim woman, they are only allowed to expose a certain amount of the body as well. right? So I know these issues happen in the Muslim community. I know that my wife teaches in this masjid, and she addressed it to some parents, and the parents, or like girls in class, and the parents have said, no, my daughter is going to go to so and so place and get it done. Even unfortunately, certain parts of the body which are haram for the mother to see, they go and get those done. And sometimes I've married men demand that from their partners as well. So certain things are forbidden. And so inshallah, keep those things in mind for married couples as well. And so don't demand something from your partners which is haram, which most people unfortunately do that as well. So keep that in mind as well. Because on Yawm al-Qiyamah, the husband is also responsible for putting his wife in that situation.
Is that for all cases? Because I know it could be like doctors and that, yeah.
No, that's even for medical reasons. Okay, the doctor's job will be to see a certain part of your body for medical health reason. That's different.
Yeah.
But now you as a patient, you have to be a judge that the thing you're going for, is it really legit for me to go and show that part? Like even for example, IVF treatment for women who can't give natural or have natural pregnancies, and they get certain, the part from the woman and the man, and they mix it in a lab, and some ulama wrote that it's haram to even do that. Why? Because having a child is not necessary, but covering your private parts is farz. So if you're just going to the doctor just to show or get that done, then the ulama something have wrote that is haram. Yeah, so these opinions do exist, even though the others do say it's halal, it's perfectly fine if you want to do it just for that one reason. But I'm trying to say that even from your point of view, it's not that the doctor only is allowed to see or not allowed to see. Are you allowed to go to the doctor in the first place for a certain thing that you don't really need to go for? Yeah, so these things need to be kept in mind as well. Obviously, if you have a certain injury, and for example, you bust your leg in football, it's broken from your thigh, the guy's like, we need to obviously remove your trousers, put a cast on your leg, and you're like, Astaghfirullah, is that allowed? Yeah? So sometimes people get a bit extreme like that as well, and that is, in that case, you only expose that which needs to be exposed. Right? So like for example, a person needs a knee injury, and he needs to expose his right leg for the operation. He should only expose his right leg to the extent that it only needs to be exposed. Anything that more he does, or someone might just fully remove the trouser and say, okay, just do the operation. This happens, it's haram. So you have to be vigilant on this. Another place, I just want to, I know this is bad, so it's important to know that especially when when women go for to get a scan done to check if they're pregnant, for example. At that time, those things can happen. Now, unfortunately, because of this LGBTQ plus whatever, right? Men are no longer men, women are no longer women. So when you go to the hospital, and this has happened to our Muslim sisters, that when a woman needs to go check and do the scans on her to check if she's pregnant, they say, okay, the nurse is coming in. So she's sitting there undressed, and next minute, a guy's walking here, he's a nurse, and he's coming, and these things happen. So when you go to doctors, or you go to do certain things done, you should clarify these things before. As a Muslim, you should be aware fully. So when you say a nurse is coming in, is he a male nurse or female nurse? If they say they don't know, say we want the one you consider, I consider a female, or like that. Basically, unfortunately, you have to say these things now. People are a bit deluded out there. You got he, she, and gens now as well. So it's important, and a lot of these things happen in our community that we turn a blind eye to. Like some men say, send their wife to appointments and they don't know who's checking, and they send them to male doctors, and these things are common, very common, and they overlook these things. And so some of them, they act like that is important, is a medical check. There are sufficient female practitioners available to do these checks. So it's important that you keep these few things in mind. Inshallah, we'll stop here for this and then we'll finish off next lesson on this one. So we just do one chapter on this or one paragraph or so on this. Bismillah. If you have any questions, do let me know. I know these certain topics are a bit strange to ask in public. You can write the questions down or you can just text me and I'll answer them next lesson. Ambiguously, I won't say who's asked this question. So these things do happen. Like, a lot of people, they become like a taboo in our community that we don't want to ask this, DOC and stuff like this. But there are certain issues that we need to know about. Especially like, where women, for example, they have a miscarriage, they're missing their namaz, or certainly what to do with them, actually that flesh that has come out of the child. These kind of questions, they need to be addressed and they need to be spoken about, especially with the, if you're married with your partner and discuss these things, you should know them, inshallah. At least then your partner will feel comfortable to tell you to go ask an imam and a lot of brothers do come here, ask about this scenario, that this is the situation, what's the Islamic ruling on this. And so, because women, they don't have much places to go and much people to ask, so it's good that men know about these rules as well. Inshallah, page number 40. The etiquettes, the adab dukhul al-masjid ila tulu'i ash-shams. So Imam Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentioned previously, he spoke about istinja, wudu, and lastly he mentioned, in the last topic we covered, the adab of sitting inside the masjid. Right, the etiquettes of entering the masjid or sitting inside the masjid. Now, he mentions about the adab of staying. So he's talking about the daily routine. So far he's got up to the time when we go to the masjid and we read a namaz with Jamaat, like I mentioned. The reward for reading namaz with Jamaat is 27 times more. And a person who reads Isha and Fajr with Jamaat is as if he got reward for reading namaz all night long. So we should try to make a habit of reading namaz with Jamaat. So he mentions here, when you are going to enter the mosque, do so with your right foot first. So you enter the masjid with your right foot and then make this dua. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad wa sallim. Allahumma khfir li dhunubi waftah li abwab rahmatik. And then he makes this dua, oh Allah, bless Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam and his family and give and shower them with peace. Oh Allah, forgive my sins and open the doors of your mercy. Normally we hear this first part of Allah, Allahumma khfir li abwab rahmatik, or this last part of the dua written on, but the full reading Durood Sharif is also part of entering the masjid as well. And then it says, if you see someone, and this is something interesting that most of you might not have heard of before, and this is very interesting. It says, if you see someone selling something in the mosque, you say, may Allah make your transaction unprofitable. So if people are doing business in the mosque, basically you say to him, I hope you lose out. This is not a place of business. This is not a place of, worldly gains. So the masjid itself, you shouldn't be doing business inside a masjid and doing transactions. People sitting there, you're buying my phone, I'm selling my car, I see, come check my car out. I'm making deals inside the mosque. People do this, right? So here he mentions that if you see someone and you say, وَإِذَا رَأَيْتَ, when someone is doing something right, say to him, فَقُلْ لَا أَرْبَحُ اللَّهُ بِتَجَارَتِكَ. May Allah not give you any benefit in your business.
What about advertisements?
Advertisements, same thing. They're not allowed in mosques. Business advertisements. Like you put billboards on the mosque, right? That won't be allowed in general. And then it mentions another important thing here. If someone is making announcements, or I've lost something, I lost my phone, anyone found my phone, these kind of things, this is the Prophet spoke against this as well. The Prophet also spoke against this as well. When someone asking for missing things in mosques, doing announcements, And this is not allowed as well. Yeah, so people say, oh, I lost my phone and I lost my phone. What's the answer to that? If you want to read it, it's interesting. He said, Allah not restore whatever you have lost. Hope you don't find it basically. Right? Why? Because this is the house of Allah. The lesson that Imam Ghazali is giving you here is these things are important to people, like they might have lost something that belongs to them. You're not even allowed to make announcements for that. Never mind having a standard conversation. Where you been, long time no see, or what do you do now? You still working in that place? People do all these conversations, right? If you can't talk about things that might mean something important to you, lost something, then never mind talking about anything else worldly. So this is one of the things how you can use, and these are the hadiths of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That the Prophet sallallahu, this is as the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had commanded us to do. So when someone is looking for something, making announcements, I lost my phone, anyone see my watch, one of those ones, then you say, I hope you don't find it, basically. And another guy is talking about his business and trying to get some sales. You say to him, I hope you don't make any fee. Yeah? But obviously you don't mean in a bad way, negative way, but at the same time, you just to teach that person that this is not, the whole thing is, purpose is to teach that person this is not the place. Yeah, this is not the place for those, this is the place for the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah, so like for example, if you're praying next to someone, the guy came to you, said that, did you see my phone? Yeah, I think I left it here. You can generally always say, it's over here, like someone gave me a watch today, I found it in the wuzu area. I'm not going to say that start cursing, I hope he doesn't find his watch, why do you do the wuzu area? Obviously, if someone comes, like someone lost their credit card last Juma, I said, if you lost something, just ask him, or it'll be in the lost property section. Yeah, but if someone is going outside, walks in and says, oh, I lost my phone, anyone got my phone? That's different. One is someone saying, look, I found this mobile phone over there, I'm just handing it in. So if someone comes for it, you just give it to them, that's different. Right? But going there publicly, making announcements and asking for it is different.
What about the guy that was like advertising, giving leaflets out today for takeaway after Jummah?
So that guy, I told him off. That I did those green ones on the Hori or something.
Yeah.
Some restaurant ones.
Little now.
Yes, I did. I didn't meet the guy, but he told someone else to give, and then I said that it's not allowed. Yeah. Especially in our masjid, we don't. If you let one person do advertisements of takeaways, the next guy will say, I've got this business, advertise this. Next, then it's become more of a business club than Jummah. And so I did tell that person off and said, don't do this outside this masjid. Yeah. Generally, even though outside is allowed, like the outside is allowed. This is talking about like in the masjid hall itself. But in our masjid, I don't personally like it outside as well because it kills the buzz of Jummah. It kills the purpose of being here. If you held, for example, like careers even for youngsters, then that would be different. Obviously, every person will be trying to motivate and say, going to this law, going to this sphere, going to this sphere. That's different. Right? But just, making announcements in the masjid hall. So technically, even though we say this, the whole thing is the masjid, right? It doesn't mean that it's the masjid. The masjid is basically these walls here. Like the back wall is not considered the masjid. Why? Because when women are impure, they still come to this mosque and read Quran or the teacher teach and stuff like that. So they're allowed inside that back wall, but it's haram for a woman to enter the masjid hall. Right? So even like the toilet, even though they join to the masjid, this is the way buildings are made or built these days. But generally, the masjid hall will just be a masjid hall, and there won't be like extra things around it. So those hadiths that you hear people, youngsters using, is sunnah to wrestle inside the mosque, and they start wrestling inside the mosque. They misunderstood those. It means in the hudud of the masjid. Like for example, that would be for us wrestling in the car park, wrestling in the side room or in the back hall, and that we could say is allowed. But wrestling inside this hall won't be allowed. So people misapply that and start wrestling in the masjid and say, this sunnah, the Sahaba used to do it. And this akal as well, and Allah given, this one is called the masjid itself, one is the hudud, the boundaries of the masjid. which we know, like for example, if you're standing in the car park, say, where are you going to say in the masjid? They're not going to say, I'm in a car park opposite the mosque, right? So these things need to be kept in mind as well. And then he mentions here, we'll stop here inshallah. And we'll continue from here. When you have entered the mosque, and then we talk about those body intentions. So do keep these things in mind. Main thing here Imam Ghazali mentioned, don't have worldly conversations in the masjid, especially in the main hall that's considered to be the prayer hall itself. Inshallah, if you have any questions, just message me. No, that's different, that's genuine. So you got a lesson to our area. Inshallah, but generally, talking about worldly things is different. Talking about beneficial things is different. Right? For example, it could be, it might seem worldly from one aspect, but it might be beneficial. Like you're asking Islamically, am I allowed to do this degree in college? Even though it might seem worldly, but it's Islamic. The Prophet ﷺ didn't restrict it only that beneficial knowledge is only about, has to be Quran and Sunnah, otherwise you're not allowed to say. There's certain things that are allowed to be spoken about, but as long as they're not contradicting the teaching of the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. آمين اللهم آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار اللهم